Hi everybody. So this is going to be my implementation of the midterm assignment. So first thing I'll do is I'm going to pull up the expectations for the assignment and kind of just talk through this briefly. So the goal of the midterm is to build um, class definitions provided below and then use those classes to build the application that meets the needs outlined. So the basic idea here is that we're trying to build a system that allows someone to function a cash register. They'll have an order, they'll have menu items that can be ordered, and then it's just a matter of allowing someone to input, I want to buy a cheeseburger, I want to buy a chicken sandwich, whatever, and just kind of key those items in, and as they're keyed and selected, they're added to the order. And then once they've keyed in all the expected items, the order just closes, and it goes through the checkout process of prompting for payment, accepting that payment, saying how much change is due, and then eventually printing out a receipt of the transaction. I'm expecting in this to see variable declaration, object initialization, class declaration, or the actual construction of the class, your ability to create a parameterized constructor. That's a constructor that takes values. When you say new menu item, you actually can pass values in. That's a parameterized constructor. I want to see methods being declared that can go with or without parameters. The use of private fields, if-else statements, loops, arrays and array lists, and then just your use of your class and its class members in your program. So to start off, what we're going to do is we're going to implement these two class models, menu item and order. Now, I've made this statement before in class that I actually have a typo here, that this price should not be a string, it should be a double. I'm pretty sure that just about everybody caught on to that, so thank you. And I'll be making that adjustment in my implementation as well. So to start off, let's go ahead and create a project, and we'll start building our class models. So inside of NetBeans, we'll say new Java application. I'm going to call this midterm. Finish. Alright, so NetBeans brings me into a new empty project. It generates a class called midterm.java, and it gives me my static void main. Now, this class is the entry point into the project, so I'm going to use that later as I write the actual implementation of this midterm. But to start off, what I want to do is I want to actually create the menu item class and the order class. So I'm going to right-click on Packages, New, Java Class. I'm going to make a class called Menu Item. Now, based on the model that I provided, we're going to have two fields in here called Name and Price. Name is a string, and price, as I said before, is showing here as a string, but it should actually be a double. So I'm going to declare these two fields first. So these will be private, so private string name, and then private double price. Now, because these are private, what I'll need to do is also create public getters for each one of these fields. So my getters are methods. They'll be public. The return type for the method will match the data type of the private field. So if I do name, it'll be a string. And then I'm going to call my method name getName, open close parentheses to signify that this is a function or a method. And then inside of the body of this, I'm just going to return my private field name. And I'm using this to help identify that name is a private member of the menu item class. So this refers to the menu item. I'm going to do the same thing for price. So public double, because my price is a double, get price, parentheses to show that this is a method, And then inside of my body, I'll return this price. Alright, so that part of it is pretty straightforward. The second class is the order class. So I'll right click on my package, new Java class. I'm going to call this class order. Now, based on the outline I provided, I'm expecting a 3 fields: order date, which is a calendar type; order ID, which is an int; items, which is an array list of menu items. So we're going to be using this menu item class that we just created in the declaration of items. All right, let's go and do that. So these are private fields again. So private calendar. This will be order date. Oops, sorry about that. And I like to keep my private field names lowercase for the first letter. That helps you identify that it is a member of the class, and the member is pretty much a field or a method. So this is a private member or a private field. And second of all, it also helps you to know that this is a variable. So generally you'll see your classes having uppercase first letters, where class members, your fields and your methods, start off with a lowercase letter. Alright, so we have private order date, which is a calendar type. That means it's telling me that I need to do an import of java.util.calendar. So we'll do that import. And then we'll do a private int of order ID. And then the last field is private array list. And we're going to, again, use this menu item class in the declaration of our array list, and we'll call this items. Again, that means it's letting me know that I'm using array list and I need to add an import. So I'll add that import. So I now have 3 private fields: order date, order ID, and items. I also have a series of methods that I've outlined that are add menu item, get items, get total, add tender, and get change. Each one of these methods is a public method. Some of these methods I've identified that you need to include parameters with those methods, and I've also designated a return type. So let's start with add menu item. So this will be a public method. It'll be void, which means that it does not return a value when it's called, and it's called add menu item. Now the parameter that will be passed into this is the menu item to be added to this order. So we're going to pass in a menu item, and I'll just call it item. So that'll be the variable name for that parameter. I'm going to notate that this method adds a menu item to the order. And then the way that we're going to add that menu item is we're going to use our array list items, and we're going to say this.items dot add. We're going to add item. So if you think through the process of how this works, is that we have inside of our order we have a list, an array list, that will be where we write down all of our items. You can kind of equate that to when you go into a restaurant and you have a waiter or waitress, and they ask you what you would like to order, and you tell them what item or items you want to order, and they write it down on their little sketch or little notepad. So items in this class is representative of that little notepad where you would jot down the items off the menu that are being ordered. So that's the basic mechanics that we're trying to implement here with add menu item. Alright, the next method is get items. And what that's designed to do is return all of the items in the order. So we'll do public, and we're returning all the items out of the array list. So we're going to return an array list of menu items. And we'll call our method getItems. Now this could be implemented in different ways. There's different levels of complexity about how we can go about this, but the most simplistic way is to just return items. So again, I'm going to document with my Java doc that this method returns all items currently in the order. Alright. So we have two of our methods implemented per the spec that was given. The next one is getTotal. With getTotal, it'll be public. It will return a double. The method name is getTotal. You'll notice that with getTotal and with getItems that we don't have any parameters being passed into these methods. We don't have to give or tell this method anything that it doesn't already know. So if you want to think about how does this method work, this method is relying on existing information that exists within the class itself. So when we call getItems in the previous method, it relies on knowing what items are in the order because it has a private field called items. getTotal is slightly more complex. getTotal is going to go through the list of items and it's going to total them up. So the first thing we're going to want to do is declare a double as the total that we're going to calculate. So this variable, total, type double, is going to be where we store or add up the price of each item. And eventually, when we get to the end of this method, the goal is to return the total. Now, to get from A to Z, we need to loop through the items in the order and add their price to total. So to do that, we'll do a for loop. So for int I equals 0, so we're going to declare the variable I as an integer and set it equal to 0. And then we're going to say while I is less than, we're going to say items dot size. So while I is less than the size of the array list items, perform this loop action. And we're going to increment or step up one step for every iteration of the loop. So we're looping through items, and what we want to do is we want to say the total equals the total plus items dot get I dot get price. Now that line may look a little complex. Okay, so let's maybe break that down a little bit to make it a little clearer. So the first thing that I'd like to do is let's create a variable inside of our loop called menu item. And we'll call it cur. So this will be the current item in the loop. So we're going to set cur equal to items.get I. So that will be the current menu item in the items array list. So that'll be the item that we're working with, and then we will do total equals total plus cur dot get price. What this line will do is it will take total as it currently stands. So if this is the first time through the loop, it'll be 0 plus the price of the current menu item. So it'll add those two together and set total equal to that new value. So these 3 lines of code from here to here are the equivalent of this single line. You'll see elements of total equals total plus, same as the line above. Get items dot get I is the same as this line here, and then get price is off of the current item get price. So both options are perfectly the same and equivalent. Generally speaking, the lower one, this one here, is slightly more efficient because you're not declaring another variable. But aside from that, they are essentially the same line of code. Okay, so that will sum up the total of all the items, and then that total will be returned. So that's get total. The last two are add tender and get change. Now, in order to do add tender, we will actually need to declare another private, and this one was not outlined, but it's more necessary for the mechanics. So it's private double, and then we'll just call it tender. And the reason we need that is so that when someone calls public void add tender, and they pass in the double of the amount, we can then take amount and store it inside of the tender variable. So to do that, it's this dot tender equals amount. So that allows us to take amount and store it locally inside of a private field variable. And the last piece is to return the change. So this will be public double get change, and this will actually require a little bit of logic where we'll have to confirm that there is tender. If tender is greater than 0, we'll calculate change. Else, I want to return 0. So what that looks like in code is if tender is greater than 0, we'll want to calculate the change. And the way that we calculate change is we will call get total, which will get us the total amount, and we will want to return tender minus get total. So we'll take what was given and subtract the total of all the order and return that value. If the tender equals 0, then we'll just return 0 as the change. We could throw an exception here and have some exception catching and other elements, but for simplicity, this is the most effective use. You'll also notice, just as a commentary, is that we use the brackets here to show the body of the if statement. The else, since it's a single line, we can just say else return 0. It will work this way. It's not required that you add the curly, but it is easier to read if you always add curly brackets around your logic statement bodies. Alright, so at this point we have a menu item class, and we have an order class. Now, you may be saying, well, we didn't implement getters for the fields, and that's a valid observation. So to implement getters, we'll simply do as we did with menu item, and we'll start off with public, and we'll do order date, so it'll be a calendar. Get order date. We'll return order date. Public int get order ID, and return order ID. And we've actually implemented the getter for the items when we did the implementation of get items. Now, we could implement a getter for tender. There's no reason we couldn't or shouldn't. But at the same time, we want to make sure that we don't implement a setter for some reason, because add tender is the function that takes in the tender. So if we need to have access to that for some reason, we can implement public double get tender, and we would return tender. Okay. So up to this point, we've implemented our classes. We have the appropriate getters as well as the additional member methods that were defined in the assignment details. That will be the end of this video, and the second half of the implementation, which will get into the screens as well as setting up the actual flow of the application, will be in the next video. Thanks.